Hello, class. This is our second week lecture for our mass communication class, and I'm doing this at 4:32 Saturday morning, the 28th, 28th, I think it is, of August. There's our book, again, the 11th edition. It's a very good book. And we're basically still in chapter 1 of the book for today's lecture. Finishing up some of the major themes of the book and of the course as we kind of set the stage for moving forward and talking about each medium, its history, what's special about it, etc. So, our agenda for this lecture is as follows. Questions or concerns, again, I am asking you to submit those on Blackboard. So in every weekly folder, you'll find an assignment. I just want you don't have to write too many words to answer this, just list. Actually, for this assignment, you'll list 3 things you learned that week, and then list any questions or concerns you still have. I'm just putting this as number 1 on the agenda because I want to make sure that you guys know that I am doing my best to keep tabs on how things are going for you in the class and answer any questions or concerns you may have. And I want to do it at least every week. We're going to spend a few minutes just quickly reviewing the last lecture. And then for today's lecture, there are really 3 areas. One-to-many, mass communications and culture. And then we will focus on media literacy, which is really what this whole class is about. I am going to separately record a discussion of one of the 3 mass media events I suggested we focus on in the last class. You guys are going to vote on which one you want to discuss. I haven't received the results of that poll yet. When I have gotten those results, I'll be able to figure out which event we're going to discuss and I'm going to talk about, and then I will record that lecture. So what I talk about and what we focus on, it will be based on your votes on those 3 events. You'll recall one was the opening ceremony for the Tokyo 2020 held in 2021 Olympics. The second was the latest edition of Family Guy, and the third was Joe Biden's inaugural speech. So I'll talk about one of those events. We'll kind of dissect and analyze that event and try to apply some media literacy to it. Okay? And then we'll finish, as we always do, by discussing what's due between this lecture and the next lecture in terms of reading and homework. Okay. So I want to make sure, look at that poor child is puzzled about something, you can see on her face. I want to make sure I'm getting those from you and on Blackboard, and then I'm answering them. So number 1 is to review what we did in the last class. So in the last class, we were in chapter 1 in the book, and we were just kind of defining and exploring some of the key principles. We talked about what is communication. It basically said it involves 2 beings, and that communication is shared between a source and a receiver, and We also looked at a diagram, which was in your book, showing a source, a receiver, a medium, which is between the two, message, and that message has some effect on the receiver. We talked about mass communication, the fact that really steps it up. It's not a one-to-one situation, it is a one-to-many situation when we're talking about mass communication. Mass communication is what this course is about. Okay, so that's what we did. Now, in terms of new material for today's lecture, first we're going to talk about one-to-many, mass comms and culture, and then media literacy. So this is the drawing that you guys have seen quite a lot of in these lectures. Okay, so the way this is illustrated, it's one-to-one. One to several, of course, would be the next step up in terms of communication. And one to several communication is a professor lecturing a class, a speaker speaking to a room full of people. And I can't think of too many examples of it would be very limited circulation media. I mean, a medium is not normally going to be involved in terms of a printed or electronic medium. It's usually a live event, I would say. And if you guys have some disagreement with that or some other thoughts on it, share them back to me, send me an email, or make a comment. And one-to-many is when we're talking about mass. Okay, and I just pulled this logo from an old Hollywood movie studio called RKO Pictures. Made a lot of famous movies. This shows a radio tower on top of the earth. So when I think about mass communication, that would be an old-fashioned kind of image that comes to mind. This is another diagram from your book. It kind of takes our first one of one-to-one and gets more detailed and really tries to show mass communication. There's some sort of organization is the source. Okay, it's not necessarily just one person, it's a group of people, and that the communication is flowing out on the top. It's flowing out to what we call the mass audience, which is many receivers, okay, and many groups of receivers. So each one of those spheres has other little spheres kind of radiating off it. So that's a more realistic depiction of mass communication. So it's identical messages being sent by the organization to the mass audience, which is made up of many receivers, each connected with a group in which the message is reinterpreted and often acted upon. And then at the bottom here, you'll see that it not only shows the messages that are being sent from the source to the audience, but the audience is sending some kind of feedback back to the organization. And then you'll also see at the very bottom that there's input from news or art sources, information or entertainment sources, and that input is going into the organization. There's also decoding, encoding, and interpretation of messages going on here. So this gets to be a pretty sophisticated model for mass communication, and this really is kind of the model for our class to think about. So we're talking about one to many, okay? And so when we go back through history of humankind, um, there were not a lot of one to many communications. Um, there was not a lot of mass media really until technology stepped in. And this fellow named Gutenberg was given credit for inventing a movable type printing press um, in the 1450s. Before Gutenberg, it was in Germany. Books, printed matter, um, were very limited. There were only thousands of books, and they tended to be in monasteries and churches or owned by the nobility. These were handmade uh, items. Took many, many hours of someone laboring with a pen and ink for the most part. But after the movable type printing press, which is normally ascribed to have been invented around 1450, books could be produced much more quickly. And the printing press basically was letters, kind of metal casts of letters that could be put together to form different words. Each letter was its own little block, and so you could, using those letters, standard letters, rather than having to ink with a pen, you could print a whole page just by putting the ink on the letters and then pressing the paper to the all the letters. Okay, I have a little video on that we're going to look at here in a minute. But here's what happened. Within 50 years, over 9 million books are in print. A lot of them are Bibles, but there are a lot of other books too. And this new technology, movable type printing press, moved these books out from nobles in the church into the hands of middle class, so-called middle class people, tradespeople, people who had some money. Bibles were translated from Greek and Latin into German and English and Spanish and Italian. Now here, of course, you notice I'm focusing on Europe here. We'll talk about other parts of the world in a minute. So people could actually read what was in the Bible for the first time, as opposed to having it be a kind of a mysterious book. And some of the people who read what was in the Bible and then looked at what the church was doing at the time, the Catholic Church, selling indulgences, for instance, where if you paid a priest a certain amount of money, you'd get a piece of paper which would supposedly keep some loved one who'd passed away from spending extra time in purgatory. So if you paid a priest and bought an indulgence, your departed loved one would go to heaven more quickly. I mean, things like this were going on, and lots worse than that. And so this understanding of what was really in the Bible versus what was going on with the church led to something called the Reformation. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, let's take a moment. I'm going to stop the tape here and insert a video about how the printing press really worked, so you really get a sense of it.